My family had a word for everything that made them uncomfortable, and that word was dramatic. When I was 12 and told my mother that my brother had shoved me into the garage door hard enough to leave a bruise the size of my palm, she pressed her lips together and said, "You're being dramatic." Leah. When I was 17 and said I wanted to apply to pharmacy school instead of staying local to help run the family hardware store, my father looked up from his newspaper and said the same thing. Dramatic. It was their all-purpose eraser. Anything that inconvenienced them, anything that made the picture look messier than they wanted it to look, got labeled that way and quietly shelved. I learned early that in the Harmon house, the truth was less important than the version of events everyone could agree on at Sunday dinner. My brother Colton was 2 years older than me and had been the family's golden child since approximately the day he was born. I don't say that with bitterness anymore. I say it the way you describe the weather. It's just a fact. He was loud and charming and quick with a joke. The kind of person who could walk into a room and make everyone feel like they'd been waiting for him. My parents adored it, my father especially. He'd clap Colton on the back at every family gathering like he was accepting an award on Colton's behalf. My mother kept a framed photo of him on the mantle, his high school graduation. Big grin, cap tilted sideways, right at eye level. Mine was smaller, tucked behind a ceramic rooster she'd had since the 90s. I became a licensed pharmacist at 27, board-certified, DEA registered, working at a regional hospital system in their clinical pharmacy unit. I did medication reconciliation for ICU patients, reviewed drug interactions, consulted with attending physicians on complex cases. It was not glamorous work in the way that Colton's work was glamorous. He sold custom kitchen cabinets and had a company truck with his name on the side and was, by most family accounts, a success. My work happened in fluorescent-lit rooms and sometimes saved lives, and nobody put it on a truck. At Thanksgiving, the year I turned 31, my mother introduced me to her book club friends as our daughter who works at the pharmacy. Not clinical pharmacist. Not hospital. The pharmacy. Like I was counting change behind a register at the CVS on Route 9. I smiled and said nothing. I'd had years of practice. Colton arrived 40 minutes late with a case of beer and a story about a client who'd tried to lowball him, and the whole table turned toward him like flowers toward a window. That's just how it was. The thing that people don't understand about toxic family dynamics, and I only understand it now because I've had a lot of time and a decent therapist to think it through, is that there's rarely one dramatic moment that breaks you. It's the accumulation. It's the slow pressure of 10 years of dinners where your achievements are minimized and your brothers are amplified. 10 years of, you're too sensitive, and why do you always have to make things difficult? Until you start to wonder if you actually are too sensitive. If you actually are difficult, you start to map your own self-perception around their distortions. I was good at my job. Excellent, actually. My supervisor, Dr. Okonkwo, had twice recommended me for a clinical leadership track. I had a clean record, a solid reputation, a one-bedroom apartment 20 minutes from the hospital that I paid for myself. By every external measure, I was fine. Inside the Harmon house, I was still the daughter who couldn't take a joke. My father's 65th birthday party was held on a Saturday in late October at my parents' house, the same split level in western Pennsylvania, where Colton and I grew up. My mother had been planning it for 2 months. The guest list included aunts, cousins, 2 of my father's old work colleagues, and my brother's girlfriend, Thompson, who had a talent for laughing at everything Colton said and making it look genuine. I arrived on time with a card and a gift I put actual thought into. A leather-bound journal because my father had mentioned months ago that he wanted to start writing down some family history, and I'd remembered that. Nobody noticed. Colton showed up an hour later with a 12-pack and a paper bag from a liquor store, announced the party can officially start, and received a round of applause. I'm not kidding about the applause. For most of the afternoon, I sat at the end of the kitchen table and watched. My mother flitted between guests, refilling drinks, laughing too loud at things that weren't funny, performing ease the way she always did at these gatherings. My father held court in the living room. Colton circulated. I ate a piece of focaccia and made small talk with my Aunt Ruth, who is 80 and can't hear well and kept asking me if I was still in school. At some point, Colton drifted into the kitchen while I was rinsing a cup at the sink. Still saving lives one pill at a time? He said. Something like that. He opened the refrigerator and took out a beer. Must be nice, having a job where you discount things all day. I turned off the faucet. I don't count pills, Colton. I review drug regimens for ICU patients. He shrugged. Same difference. It wasn't worth it. I knew it wasn't worth it. But something about the particular flatness of those two words, same difference, after 31 years of watching everything I did get reduced to its smallest possible version, made me say, it's actually not. I caught a prescribing error last month that would have caused a fatal drug interaction. So, not really the same difference. He looked at me with that expression, the one that meant I was being difficult, and said, okay, Leah. Nobody said you weren't smart. He said it the way you'd say calm down to someone who isn't upset yet. The rest of the evening I kept to myself. I helped my mother clear plates. I sat through the birthday cake and the singing and the way my father looked right at Colton when he made a toast about the future of the family business, like I wasn't in the room. When people started leaving around 9, I hugged my aunt, said goodbye to my father, and went to find my jacket. Colton intercepted me in the hallway. He'd had several beers by then. I could see it in the way he was standing, slightly too relaxed, the particular looseness in his jaw. You always do this, he said. Do what? Leave early, make everyone feel like they did something wrong. I kept my voice even. I have a 6 a.m. shift tomorrow. You have a shift. He laughed in a way that wasn't friendly. That's your whole life, isn't it? Shifts, rules, protocols. You ever just, I don't know, live a little? Colton, I'm tired. I'm going to say goodbye to Mom. He stepped sideways, blocking the hallway, not aggressively, just enough to make it clear he wasn't done. You've always thought you were better than us, he said. All that fancy education, that hospital badge. You walk around like we're supposed to be impressed. Nobody asked you to be impressed. I just think, he pointed a finger at me, I think you need to stop acting like you're above this family. I looked at him, really looked. I'd spent years trying to figure out where the contempt came from, whether it was insecurity or resentment or something our parents had modeled for so long it had become instinct. Standing there in the hallway of the house we grew up in, with the blue runner rug that had been there since 1998 and the coat hooks our father put up one weekend, and the old school photos lined up along the wall, I felt a kind of clarity I hadn't expected. I don't think I'm above this family, I said. I just stopped pretending the family is above reproach. His face changed. I tried to move past him. He grabbed my arm, both hands, above the elbow, and shoved me backward into the wall hard enough that the back of my head hit the drywall and the framed mirror near the light switch tilted sideways and fell. It shattered. For about 2 seconds, neither of us moved. Then I heard my mother's voice from the kitchen. What was that? Colton stepped back. His face had gone from angry to something else. Shock, maybe, at what he'd just done, or maybe calculating, already working out what the story would be. She tripped, he called back. My mother appeared in the hallway doorway. She looked at the broken mirror. She looked at me, at the way I was standing with one hand against the wall. She looked at Colton. And then, I will never forget this as long as I live, she laughed. Not cruelly, not loudly, just a small, involuntary laugh, the kind people make when they're uncomfortable and don't know what else to do with their face, and she said, "Oh, Leah, you always did have 2 left feet." I stared at her. 2 left feet. My brother had just shoved me into a wall hard enough to break a mirror and potentially give me a concussion, and my mother's explanation for the crash was that I was clumsy. "I'm leaving," I said. "Honey, don't be dramatic." There it was. I picked up my jacket from the hook by the door, walked out, and got in my car. I sat there for a minute in the dark of their driveway, hands on the wheel, streetlight coming through the windshield. The back of my head throbbed. I touched it gently with my fingers. There was a tender spot the size of a $50, but no blood. I thought about driving to the ER. I thought about calling a friend. I thought about just going home and going to sleep and pretending, like I always had, that this hadn't happened. Then I thought about something else. I was a licensed healthcare professional with a DEA registration and a hospital employee ID. I was also, in the state of Pennsylvania, a mandatory reporter with a clearly documented understanding of what constituted assault. I'd spent a decade learning to document things precisely because documentation was the difference between life and death in medication management. I knew what records looked like. I knew what they did. I drove to the urgent care clinic 6 minutes from my parents' house. The physician on call, a tired-looking man who introduced himself as Dr. Ferris, examined my head, took photographs of the redness and early bruising on my upper arms where Colton's hands had gripped, and listened while I described exactly what had happened in sequence. I didn't editorialize. I said, my brother grabbed me with both hands above the elbow, shoved me into the wall, my head struck the drywall, I heard a mirror fall and break. That was what happened. Dr. Ferris noted a mild contusion, mild soft tissue injury to both arms. He printed the documentation, signed it, and gave me a copy. I kept that paper the way I kept my DEA certificate and my board license, in the fireproof lockbox under my bed. That night, I called my closest friend, a woman named Bex, who'd known me since undergrad and had no patience for nonsense of any kind. Go to the police in the morning, she said. It's my brother. It's assault, Leah. I went in the morning. The officer I spoke with was professional, unhurried, and took a full written statement. She photographed my arms, where the bruising had developed overnight into something unmistakable, 2 distinct hand-shaped marks in yellow and purple. She entered the report into the system. She told me that the urgent care documentation would strengthen the case considerably. Before I'd even gotten back to my car, my phone was buzzing. My mother, then Colton, then my mother again. I didn't answer. I drove to the hospital, changed into my white coat, clocked in, and spent the next 8 hours doing the job I was trained to do. 2 medication reviews, 1 consult with the cardiology team, a patient education session for a man being discharged on a new anticoagulant who had 3 other medications his outpatient doctor hadn't flagged. I found the interaction. I resolved it. Nobody applauded. That was fine. At lunch, I had a voicemail from my mother that lasted 4 minutes. The key points: Colton hadn't meant it. He was just frustrated. I had provoked him by being condescending. This was going to tear the family apart. Did I really want to do that to my father who had just had his birthday? There was also a voicemail from Colton. His lasted 45 seconds. Leah, seriously? You went to the police? It was an accident. You slipped and I grabbed your arm. This is insane. Call me back. Call me back so we can fix this before you ruin everything. You slipped. That was their version now. I forwarded both voicemails to my attorney. I'd had a personal attorney, a woman named Vanessa Cho, who specialized in civil litigation since the previous year, when I'd dealt with a landlord dispute. I'd kept her number. It turned out to be useful. They're already in damage control mode, Vanessa said when I reached her. The voicemails are actually helpful. They establish that he knows a report was filed and he's attempting to influence your account. My mother said I slipped. Good. Keep every one of these. Over the next 2 weeks, the pressure was considerable. My father called once, which surprised me. His message was shorter than either of the others. He said, "Your brother made a mistake. So did you. Come home and let's be adults about it." I thought about calling him back. I thought about it for a long time. Then I thought about my mother laughing in the hallway, that small reflexive laugh, the 2 left feet, and I didn't call. Colton's lawyer sent a letter to Vanessa suggesting the matter could be resolved through a family mediation session. Vanessa's response was brief and not warm. My hospital's HR department, because I had informed my direct supervisor of the situation as a precaution, offered me access to the Employee Assistance Program. I took them up on it. The counselor I was matched with was calm and methodical and did not tell me I was being dramatic. That was more valuable than it probably sounds. A blog in my parents' town, one of those hyper-local sites that covers youth sports results and zoning disputes and considers itself investigative journalism, ran a short item about the police report, apparently sourced from someone with access to public records. The headline was something like "Local Business Owner, Named in Domestic Dispute." It named Colton's company. I found out because 3 people sent it to me. Colton's lawyer sent another letter. Vanessa called me the morning we were due in court. Are you ready? I reviewed everything last night. I know, are you ready? Yes. The courthouse was a 40-minute drive on a gray Tuesday in December. I wore my good navy coat and flat shoes and kept my hands in my pockets on the walk from the parking garage. Vanessa met me at the security line. She was carrying a leather folder that I knew contained the urgent care records, the police photographs, the officer's written statement, the 2 voicemails, and the letter from Colton's attorney that Vanessa had described to me as a gift. Inside the courtroom, my family was already seated. My father, rigid and formal in a sport coat he'd probably worn to my college graduation. My mother in a cream-colored blazer, her posture perfect, looking like she was attending a church fundraiser rather than a hearing where her son was being charged with misdemeanor assault with the potential for felony elevation given the documentation. Colton sat between them, jaw set, eyes forward. He didn't look at me when I came in. His attorney, a man named Whitfield, which I only know because Vanessa mentioned it, stood up first and made the argument you'd expect. Sibling disagreement. No prior history. Physical contact consistent with an attempt to prevent a fall, not cause harm. My client is a respected member of the community, a small business owner, a family man, and this is an unfortunate mischaracterization of a moment that had no criminal intent. My mother nodded along, my father stared at the flag. Vanessa stood up and did not raise her voice. She laid out the timeline without commentary. Time of incident. Time of urgent care visit. The clinical documentation from Dr. Ferris, contusion to the posterior cranium, bilateral soft tissue injury to the upper arms, injury pattern consistent with forceful gripping and contact with a hard surface. She noted that the plaintiff had arrived at urgent care within 15 minutes of the incident, before any bruising had fully developed, which meant the documentation captured the immediate aftermath. She then played the voicemail from Colton. The courtroom was very quiet during the 45 seconds of his voice. You slipped and I grabbed your arm. When it ended, even Colton's attorney didn't look comfortable. Vanessa said, the defendant's own words established that he was present, that he made physical contact, and that he was already working to reframe the narrative within hours of the incident. The medical record establishes what that contact produced. She sat down. The judge was a woman somewhere in her 50s who had the manner of someone who had not been surprised by anything in a courtroom in a very long time. She looked at Colton's attorney. She looked at the folder of documentation. She looked at me once, briefly, with an expression I couldn't fully read. Colton's attorney made a second attempt. He said something about the photographs being inconclusive. He said something about the voicemail being taken out of context. He said the clinical notes were... Counselor, the judge said, the clinical notes are from a licensed physician and are dated the night of the incident. Please continue only if you have something substantive to add. He did not have something substantive to add. The judge took approximately 10 minutes to review the documentation. 10 minutes during which the only sounds were paper turning, the hum of the overhead ventilation system, and my father shifting in his seat. When she looked up, she looked at Colton directly. The evidence presented here is not complicated, she said. What is complicated is how often situations like this one are brought before this court, only after the victim has spent years absorbing behavior that incrementally escalated to this point. The documentation is clear. The record is clear. She paused, and the attempt to characterize this as a simple accident is made significantly more difficult by your own recorded words. Colton opened his mouth. The judge held up one hand. She issued the ruling, guilty on the misdemeanor assault charge. Mandatory anger management completion, reported to the court. A 2-year protective order meaning no contact with me. Direct or indirect for 24 months. A fine. And a notation in the criminal record that would appear on background checks. It was not a prison sentence. It wasn't meant to be. But it was permanent. It was on paper. It existed in a system that doesn't get rewritten over Sunday dinner. My mother made a sound, not a word, just a sound. A small exhale that carried everything she'd spent 30 years refusing to say out loud. Colton sat completely still. I don't know what he was thinking. I don't need to know. Vanessa touched my arm lightly as we stood to leave. Okay? Yes, I said. In the hallway outside the courtroom, my father caught up with me. He looked older than he had a month ago. Or maybe I was just seeing him more clearly. His voice, when he spoke, was lower than usual. "You didn't have to take it this far," he said. I thought about what to say. I thought about the journal I'd given him for his birthday. I thought about the photograph of me behind the ceramic rooster. I thought about the hallway with the runner rug and the coat hooks and the broken mirror. "I didn't take it anywhere, Dad," I said. "I just stopped moving it." He didn't respond. I walked to the parking garage, got in my car, and drove back to the hospital. I had a 2 o'clock consult request from the nephrology team about a patient with compromised renal clearance and a complex medication list. I pulled it up on my phone at a red light, read the preliminary notes, and started working through the interactions in my head. That was the thing about my job. You showed up. You looked at the facts. You applied what you knew, without letting how you felt about the outcome change what the evidence was telling you. You acted on the truth, even when the truth was inconvenient. Even when somebody was going to be upset about it. That was not coldness. That was not being difficult. That was the whole job. 2 weeks after the hearing, I got a text from a number I didn't recognize. It took me a moment to realize it was from a phone Colton had borrowed, because texting directly would have violated the protective order. The message said, "I hope you're happy." I screenshot it and sent it to Vanessa, who forwarded it to the court. That was the last time I heard from him. My mother wrote me a letter, actual paper in an envelope with a stamp. 3 weeks later. She wrote that she hoped I knew she loved me. She wrote that she wished things had gone differently. She wrote that the family was struggling and that the holidays were going to be hard. She asked if I would consider coming home for Christmas. I read it twice. Then I placed it in the fireproof lockbox next to the urgent care report and the board certification and the DEA registration. I did not go home for Christmas. I worked the holiday shift, which nobody else wanted, which meant I had my pick of the schedule for the following 3 months. I ate Thai food from the place near my apartment and watched something forgettable on my laptop and called Bex in the evening. She made me laugh 3 separate times. I went to bed at 10. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't triumphant. It was just quiet in the way that quiet is supposed to feel. Not empty, not suppressed, just genuinely still. In the spring, Dr. Okonkwo recommended me for the clinical leadership track I'd been eligible for since the year before. The role came with a different title, a different pay grade, and oversight of the pharmacy consultation program for 2 hospital departments. I said yes. On my first day in the new role, I updated the name placard outside my office. I stood in the doorway and looked at it for a moment. Then I went in, sat down at the desk, opened my laptop, and started work. Nobody clapped. That was fine. The work had never required an audience. What I know now, what I spent most of my life not knowing, is that systems built on denial are not actually stable. They look stable because everyone inside them keeps agreeing to maintain the fiction, keeps smoothing over the cracks, keeps using words like dramatic and difficult, and you always have to make things complicated to keep the pressure equalized. But the stability is borrowed. It's structural debt. Eventually something breaks, and the only question is whether you're going to be on the side that tries to keep pretending, or the side that finally has documentation. I chose documentation. I chose it at urgent care at 10:30 on a Saturday night in a fluorescent-lit room with a paper gown crackling every time I moved, while a tired doctor photographed my arms with a clinical camera and wrote down exactly what he saw. I chose it every time I forwarded a voicemail instead of returning it. I chose it every time I sat across from Vanessa and gave her facts instead of feelings. And the choice held, not because I was cold, not because I was distant or robotic or difficult, because I understood, finally, what my family had never been willing to learn, that the truth doesn't need your permission to exist. It just needs someone willing to write it down. The thing I keep coming back to even now is the mirror, not the shattered glass on the floor, though I think about that too, but the one my mother held up my entire life and told me was accurate, the one that showed me as too sensitive, too serious, too much. I spent so long looking into that version of myself that I almost stopped questioning it. What changed wasn't a single moment. It was a choice I made standing in a parking lot at 10:30 on a Saturday night, with bruises forming on my arms and a decision in front of me that felt small but wasn't. I could drive home. I could absorb it, file it away, call it a difficult night and move on like I always had. Or I could drive 6 minutes down the road and tell the truth to someone who was required to write it down. I chose the 6 minutes. That's the part people sometimes miss when they hear a story like mine. They think the turning point was the courtroom, or the verdict, or the moment the judge said the word guilty and my brother had nowhere left to hide. But the real turning point was quieter than that. It was a woman alone in a car, deciding that what had just happened to her was real enough to document, that she was worth the paperwork. I think about Colton sometimes, not with anger anymore, mostly with something that feels closer to sadness. He grew up in the same house I did, absorbing the same lessons. The difference is that he benefited from them. When you spend your whole life being told that you are naturally right, that the rules bend for charm, that consequences are things that happen to other people, you don't build the internal architecture to handle a world that doesn't agree. He wasn't prepared for documentation. He wasn't prepared for a system that doesn't care how likable you are at a birthday party. What I had, without fully knowing it, was something my job had been building in me for years. A belief that evidence matters more than narrative. That what actually happened and what the most convincing person in the room says happened are not the same thing, and the difference is provable. That precision is not coldness, it's respect for the truth. I'd spent my career catching errors that killed people precisely because I refused to assume the chart was correct, just because someone confident had written on it. That same instinct, turned inward, saved me. I'm not going to pretend it didn't cost anything. There are holidays I don't go home for. There are phone calls I don't return. There is a letter in a fireproof box that I haven't reread because I don't need to. The people who raised me chose a story over their daughter, and living with that isn't painless just because I made the right call. Doing the right thing doesn't come with anesthesia. But I know this. The strength to walk into an urgent care clinic and say, "This is what happened." That wasn't stubbornness. It was the kind of integrity I had been quietly building my whole life without realizing it. Every time I double-checked a prescription, every time I flagged an interaction someone else had missed, every time I chose accuracy over the easier answer. Character compounds. It doesn't announce itself. It just shows up when you need it. If you're in a house that keeps asking you to be smaller, quieter, easier to manage, I want you to hear this. The truth doesn't need their permission to exist. It just needs you to stop erasing it. That's the only lesson I have. It took me 31 years and a broken mirror to learn it, but it holds.